I used to think the worst thing you could find in the woods at night was a dead animal, until the night my dog started digging and uncovered a man who was supposed to be dead. The road outside Cedar Ridge was empty at that hour, the kind of quiet two-lane highway that stretched for miles between pine trees and dark farmland. And after a 14-hour shift at the diner, all I wanted was to get home, tuck my 6-year-old daughter Lily into bed, and collapse on the couch with my shoes still on. Tighten my Neapolitan Mastiff was riding in the back seat like he always did, his massive gray head resting between the front seats, his breath fogging the glass every few seconds. Titan had been with us since Lily was 3, and in a lot of ways, he was the only reason I ever felt safe living alone out there. He was almost 140 pounds of muscle and loyalty, and he took his job very seriously, so when he suddenly lifted his head and let out a low rumble deep in his chest, I noticed immediately. Titan rarely growled. Unless something was wrong, I slowed the car instinctively, my headlights sweeping across the edge of the forest lining the road. Nothing moved, no other cars, no houses, no sound except the hum of my engine and the wind brushing through the trees. Then Titan barked once, sharp and urgent, before pushing his huge body against the back door, like he wanted out right now. Easy boy, I muttered, pulling onto the gravel shoulder, thinking maybe he smelled a deer or raccoon. Titan wasn't the type to overreact, but the moment I opened the door, he jumped out and ran straight toward the tree line, nose low to the ground. I grabbed my phone and followed him, half annoyed, half curious. The air smelled like damp earth and pine needles, and the beam from my phone's flashlight bounced across the dirt. Titan was already 20 yards into the woods, pawing at something near a shallow ditch. Titan, what did you find? I called, expecting him to be digging up a bone or chasing a scent, but when I reached him, he wasn't sniffing anymore. He was digging, and I mean digging like his life depended on it, dirt flying behind him in heavy clumps, his giant paws tearing through the ground faster than I'd ever seen him move. Titan, stop, I said, stepping closer, but he ignored me completely, his focus locked on the same patch of earth. And that's when I noticed something strange. The soil wasn't packed the way forest ground usually is. It looked disturbed, like someone had recently filled the hole back, and a cold ripple slid down my spine. Titan kept digging until suddenly he froze, his head tilting slightly, and then he barked again. Louder this time. I stepped forward, shining my light into the shallow pit he'd created, and for a second my brain refused to understand what I was seeing, because sticking out from the dirt just beneath the surface was a human hand, pale, still, and half buried in the soil. My breath caught in my throat. Oh my God, I whispered, stumbling back a step. My first thought was that we had found a body someone had hidden out here in the middle of nowhere, and my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Titan nudged the dirt again, gently this time, whining under his breath like he knew something I didn't. I forced myself closer, my hands shaking as I brushed away a thin layer of loose soil, and that's when the fingers moved. Not much, just the smallest twitch, but enough to stop my heart completely. Wait, I breathed, dropping to my knees. Titan had uncovered more now, the outline of a man's arm leading down into the earth, his skin cold but not lifeless. My pulse raced as I cleared dirt away from his face, and suddenly his chest rose in a shallow, uneven breath. He was alive, barely, but alive, and for a moment the entire forest seemed to go silent except for the sound of Titan breathing beside me and the weak inhale of the stranger buried beneath the ground. Then slowly the man's eyes opened, and his voice came out rough and faint, like someone speaking after a long time underwater. They thought I was dead. I did not move for a second because my brain could not accept what my eyes were seeing. People did not simply appear alive after being buried in the middle of the woods, and yet the man in front of me had just spoken. Titan stood beside the shallow pit, his massive body tense, but strangely calm, as if he understood that the person under the dirt was not a threat. The stranger blinked slowly, like the light from my phone hurt his eyes, and when he tried to lift his head, he barely managed an inch before it fell back against the soil. Do not move, I said quickly. Even though my voice trembled, I reached for my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911, my thumb hovering over the screen while I looked back at the man buried beneath the earth. He looked somewhere in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, dark hair matted with dirt-sharp features, the kind you notice immediately, even under bad lighting. He did not look like someone who belonged in the woods behind a rural highway. He looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom or on the cover of a magazine. The dispatcher answered, and I forced my voice to stay steady. Hello, my name is Emily Carter. I am on County Road 17, just north of Cedar Ridge, and I Think I found someone who needs medical help. There was a pause on the line. Ma'am, what exactly is the situation? I glanced down at the stranger again. Titan lowered his head, sniffing carefully near the man's shoulder, like he was checking if the man was truly alive. He is buried, I said, the words sounding unreal. Even to me, he is buried in the ground. But he is breathing. There was another pause, longer this time, before the dispatcher replied, help is on the way, please stay on the line. I dropped the phone beside me so the dispatcher could still hear and started clearing more dirt away with my hands. Titan watched carefully, occasionally pushing soil aside with his giant paw, but doing it slowly now, like he understood this was delicate work. The man breathing was shallow, each inhale quiet but steady. You are going to be okay, I said, even though I had no idea if that was true. He turned his head slightly toward my voice, his eyes clearer, now darker than I expected, calm in a way that did not match the situation. You should not be here, he said weakly. That is a strange thing to say when someone digs you out of the ground, I replied, trying to lighten the moment, but my voice still shook. He studied my face for a second, then looked toward Titan. That dog saved my life. Titan huffed softly, like he understood the compliment. I brushed more soil from the man's jacket. It was expensive, that much was obvious, even covered in dirt, the kind of tailored fabric you saw on men who had money. Real money. Who are you? I asked quietly. The man did not answer right away. He looked past me toward the dark tree line, as if measuring something I could not see. Then his gaze returned to me, and for the first time I noticed something strange about the way he watched the world. He was alert, not panicked, not confused, alert, like someone used to reading every movement around him. My name, he said slowly, is Adrian Romano. The moment he spoke those words, the air seemed to change, even though I could not explain why. The name meant nothing to me yet, but the way he said it carried weight, like it belonged to someone important somewhere far down the road. Faint headlights suddenly appeared, cutting through the darkness. Titan lifted his head immediately, his deep growl returning in a low warning rumble. And seconds later the quiet forest filled with the sound of engines, multiple engines approaching fast. The sound of engines grew louder by the second, and Titan stepped forward, placing his massive body between me and the shallow pit, his deep growl vibrating through the cool night air. The headlights approaching through the trees cut across the forest like white blades, and for a moment my heart dropped, because I thought maybe the people who buried this man were coming back. Adrian must have seen the fear on my face, because despite the dirt on his clothes and the weakness in his voice, he spoke with a calm that did not match the situation. They are not here for you, he said quietly. How can you possibly know that? I asked, my hands still covered in dirt from digging him out. He looked toward the road again, listening the way someone listens who has spent years learning how to recognize danger by sound alone. Those are not the same engines, he replied. I frowned, not understanding what he meant, but before I could ask anything else, the first vehicle appeared at the edge of the road, a black sport utility vehicle, large, polished, and expensive, the kind of vehicle you rarely saw outside of major cities. Another one followed behind it, and then a third, all of them stopping along the shoulder near my car, their headlights flooding the woods with bright, white light. Titan barked once, loud and protective, and I instinctively reached down to grab his collar. Easy boy, I whispered, but my own pulse was racing. The doors of the vehicles opened almost at the same time, and several men stepped out. They moved quickly, but not chaotically, like people who already knew exactly what they were doing. Dark suits, dark coats, and the kind of quiet confidence you normally only see in people who are used to being obeyed. One of the men spoke into a small radio on his shoulder before scanning the trees until his eyes landed on me and Titan, and then on the shallow pit. His entire posture changed. He hurried forward, the others following close behind. Boss, he called out the moment he saw Adrian, his voice filled with relief. We thought we lost you. Adrian exhaled slowly, like someone who had been holding his breath for hours. Help me up, he said simply. The men rushed to the edge of the pit, but before they reached down, Adrian lifted one hand slightly. Wait. They froze immediately, their attention shifting toward him with the kind of respect that told me this man was not just important, he was someone they answered to. Adrian turned his head toward me first. This woman found me, he said, his voice still weak but steady. Her dog dug me out. The men looked at me, then at Titan, and I suddenly became very aware that I was standing in the middle of the woods, covered in dirt, next to a man I barely knew, surrounded by several strangers in expensive suits. One of them stepped closer, offering a brief nod. Ma'am, thank you, he said sincerely. We have been searching for hours. Another man carefully helped Adrian sit up while the others cleared the remaining soil away from his legs. Adrian did not appear frightened or confused the way someone normally would after being trapped underground. Instead, he watched everything with quiet focus like a man already planning his next move. You called emergency services, he asked, glancing at the phone still lying in the dirt beside me. Yes, I said automatically. They should be here soon. He nodded once. Good. Then his gaze moved toward Titan again. The massive dog had stopped growling now, but he remained alert, his broad chest rising and falling slowly. Adrian studied him with a faint trace of curiosity. That is a very loyal animal, he said. Titan wagged his tail once, as if he approved of the observation. Then Adrian shifted his attention back to me, his expression thoughtful, almost calculating. Emily Carter, he said softly, repeating the name. He must have heard when I spoke to the dispatcher earlier. You and your dog just changed the course of a very dangerous night. And although I did not understand what he meant at the time, something in the way he said it made the cool forest air suddenly feel much heavier around us. For a moment nobody spoke. The only sound in the woods was the quiet idle of the sport utility vehicles on the road and the distant hum of insects in the trees. Adrian Romano sat on the edge of the shallow pit, while two of the men carefully brushed the remaining dirt from his coat and shoulders. He moved slowly, but there was something controlled about every motion, like a man who refused to show weakness even after everything that had just happened. Titan remained beside me, his broad head level with my chest, watching the strangers with steady eyes, as if he was deciding whether they could be trusted. One of the men stepped forward, a tall man with short dark hair and a calm expression. Mr. Romano, we should get you to the vehicle, he said. The medical team is on standby. Adrian nodded once, but he did not stand immediately. Instead, he looked at me again, and there was a strange focus in his gaze, as if he was memorizing my face. Emily Carter, he repeated quietly. You live near here, about 12 miles down the road. I answered automatically, the words leaving my mouth before I thought about them. His eyes flickered slightly, acknowledging the information. Then he looked toward Titan again. Your dog sensed something the rest of us missed. Titan wagged his tail once, slow and proud, and I reached down to scratch behind his ear, trying to steady my nerves. The man who had spoken earlier glanced toward the road, and then back at Adrian. Emergency vehicles will be here soon, sir. We intercepted the call. Adrian considered that for a second, then gave a small nod. That is fine, he said. Let them arrive. He shifted his weight and finally stood with the help of the two men beside him. He was tall, taller than I realized when he had been lying in the ground, and even covered in dirt. He carried himself with a quiet authority that made the other men naturally step half a pace behind him, like they were used to following his lead. I suddenly became very aware that this entire situation had moved far beyond anything normal that happened in the woods behind Cedar Ridge. Adrian took a few careful steps forward, testing his balance. Titan watched him closely, then relaxed slightly. When Adrian remained steady. Thank you, Adrian said suddenly, his voice directed toward me. I blinked, surprised. You already said that? He shook his head slowly. No, I thanked you for helping me, but that is not the same thing. He looked down at Titan again, then back to me. Many people would have driven past tonight. Many people would have assumed the dog was chasing something and ignored it, but you did not. I shrugged awkwardly. Anyone would have stopped. That is not true, Adrian replied quietly. The men around him exchanged brief glances, but none of them interrupted. A moment later, faint sirens echoed somewhere down the highway, growing closer with every passing second. One of the suited men stepped toward Adrian again. Sir, the paramedics will want to examine you. Adrian looked toward the road where the red and blue reflections were beginning to flash between the trees, and then he turned back to me one last time. Emily Carter, tonight you and your dog gave me something very rare, a second chance at breath. He paused slightly, his expression calm but serious. And when a man like me receives something that valuable, he does not forget it. Titan shifted his weight beside me, letting out a low, satisfied huff like he approved of the statement. The sirens grew louder, now headlights sweeping across the trees as the emergency vehicles turned onto the road, and Adrian Romano straightened his coat slightly, even though it was still covered in dirt, as if preparing to step back into a world that had almost buried him. Only minutes earlier, the flashing lights reached the edge of the forest. Seconds later, painting the tall pine trees in waves of red and blue, and the quiet highway that had been empty only minutes earlier suddenly filled with the sound of emergency vehicles pulling onto the gravel. Shoulder. Titan turned his head toward the road, his ears lifting as the first ambulance door opened and two paramedics stepped out carrying medical bags behind them. A sheriff truck rolled in next, followed by another patrol vehicle, their headlights cutting across the trees until the entire patch of woods where we stood was illuminated like a stage. I instinctively stepped back beside Titan, feeling suddenly out of place in my diner uniform, with dirt on my hands, while Adrian Romano stood surrounded by men in tailored coats. One of the deputies called out from the road, "Is anyone injured over there?" One of Adrian's men answered. "Immediately, we have a man here who needs medical evaluation." The paramedics hurried toward us, their boots crunching softly across the forest floor. When they reached Adrian, they paused for a second, clearly surprised to find a well-dressed man standing upright instead of lying on the ground. "Sir," one of them said gently, "we are here to help you." Adrian nodded once, calm as ever. I appreciate that. The paramedic shined a small light toward Adrian's eyes, checking his responsiveness. "Can you tell me your name?" "Sir Adrian Romano," he replied without hesitation. The paramedic exchanged a quick glance with his partner, as if the name meant something, but they did not comment. They began asking routine questions. How long had he been in the ground? Was he able to breathe normally? Did he feel dizzy? Adrian answered each question in a quiet, steady voice, while the men who had arrived with the sport utility vehicles kept a respectful distance, forming a loose circle around the scene like silent guardians. Meanwhile, one of the deputies approached me. "Ma'am, are you the one who called emergency services?" "Yes," I said, brushing dirt from my hands. "My dog found him." He raised an eyebrow, slightly glancing down at Titan. "That is quite a dog you have." Titan sat proudly beside me, his enormous head level with the deputy chest like he was used to being admired. The deputy looked back toward Adrian and the group of suited men. "Do you know this gentleman?" he asked. "No," I replied honestly. "Tonight was the first time I ever saw him." The deputy nodded slowly, writing something on a small notepad. Then another sheriff officer stepped closer and spoke quietly to him. The moment the name Romano reached the officer's ears, I noticed the subtle shift in their expressions. Not fear exactly, but recognition, the kind that travels through law enforcement circles when a powerful name appears in the wrong place. Adrian, meanwhile, allowed the paramedics to check his pulse and breathing. Though it was obvious, he was more focused on observing the people around him than on the examination itself. After a minute, the paramedic said, "We would like to transport you to the hospital for a full evaluation." Sir Adrian shook his head slightly. "That will not be necessary. I assure you I am recovering." While the paramedic hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond, but before he could speak again, one of the suited men stepped forward politely. "We will arrange private medical care. Thank you for your assistance." The paramedics exchanged another glance, but eventually nodded, understanding that the situation had moved beyond a normal roadside emergency. Adrian adjusted the front of his dirt-covered coat, then looked across the small clearing until his eyes found me again. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice calm, even with sirens echoing in the distance. "I will remember tonight." Titan wagged his heavy tail once beside me, as if he understood exactly how unusual those words truly were. The red and blue lights continued to flash across the trees long after the paramedics finished their examination, and the forest that had been silent earlier now felt crowded with voices, radios, and footsteps moving through the underbrush. Titan stayed close to my side, his massive shoulder brushing my leg every time he shifted his weight, as if he sensed that the night was not finished yet. Adrian Romano stood a few feet away, speaking quietly with the tall man who had arrived in the first sport utility vehicle. Their conversation was low enough that I could not hear the words, but I could see the seriousness in their expressions. The tall man nodded several times before glancing briefly toward the road where the sheriff deputies were still speaking with the emergency crew. Adrian followed his gaze, then looked back toward the woods, as if measuring the distance between everything that had just happened and the life he normally lived. One of the deputies approached him again. "Sir, we will need to ask you a few questions about what happened here tonight." Adrian turned toward the officer with calm patience. "I understand, officer. However, I have limited information." He gestured lightly toward the shallow pit where Titan had uncovered him. "I woke up there." The deputy studied him for a moment, clearly unsure how to respond. "That is an unusual situation," he admitted. Adrian allowed a faint, almost tired smile. "That would be an accurate description." The deputy wrote something down on his pad, then asked, "Did you see who brought you here?" Adrian shook his head slowly, not clearly. The deputy glanced toward the line of expensive vehicles parked along the shoulder, and then toward the men standing nearby who seemed to watch every movement around Adrian like quiet shadows. After a moment, the officer closed his notepad. "Well, sir, we may need to follow up later." Adrian inclined his head slightly. "Of course." Meanwhile, another deputy returned to where I stood with Titan. Ma'am, thank you for staying. While we sorted this out, he said you did the right thing calling emergency services. I nodded, still feeling like I had somehow stepped into someone else's story. Titan nudged my hand with his nose, and I scratched behind his ear. Absent-mindedly, the deputy smiled at the dog. He seems proud of himself. He deserves to be, I said softly. If it were not for him, I would have driven right past the spot. The deputy looked back toward the clearing where the dirt had been disturbed. Your dog might have saved a life tonight. Titan sat up a little straighter at that, as if he understood every word. Across the clearing, Adrian finished speaking with the tall man and slowly walked a few steps toward me. The movement immediately caught the attention of the others around him, but none of them tried to stop him. He stopped a few feet away. Emily Carter, he said again, his voice steady, even with the sirens fading in the background. Yes, I replied, still unsure what someone like him would say next. Adrian looked down at Titan. First, your dog has very strong instincts. Titan wagged his tail once heavily. Adrian then met my eyes again. The world is often changed by small moments, he said quietly. A driver choosing to stop a dog, choosing to dig a stranger, choosing to help when it would have been easier to keep driving. He paused briefly, and for the first time that night, I noticed something human behind the calm control in his expression. Tonight, you chose to stop, and that decision will have consequences neither of us can see yet. Titan leaned slightly against my leg again as the emergency lights continued to glow through the trees, and for reasons I could not explain, the air around us suddenly felt like the beginning of something much bigger than a simple roadside rescue. The emergency vehicles slowly began to leave one by one, their flashing lights fading into the distance until the quiet highway started to feel like itself again. The deputies finished speaking with Adrian, and after a few final notes on their pads, they returned to their patrol trucks, leaving only the line of dark sport utility vehicles and the men who had arrived with them. The forest grew quieter with every passing minute, and the cold night air slipped back into the space where sirens had been only moments earlier. Titan stretched beside me, his large body relaxing slightly now that the tension in the woods had begun to fade. I rubbed his shoulder absent-mindedly, still trying to process everything that had happened in the past hour. Adrian stood near the road, speaking briefly with the tall man again before the man nodded and stepped away toward the vehicles. After that, Adrian walked back toward me, his movements slower now, but still steady. The dirt on his coat had dried into faint brown streaks, but somehow it did not take away from the calm authority he carried. Emily Carter, he said once he reached me again. Yes, I replied. Titan looked up at him, quietly studying him the way dogs sometimes study people when they are deciding whether someone belongs in their world. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small card between his fingers. He held it out to me. This has my contact information, he said. I hesitated before taking it. The card was thick and simple, with only a name and a phone number printed in clean black letters. Adrian Romano. There was no company name, no title, nothing that explained who he was or why several expensive vehicles had appeared the moment his name was spoken. I slipped the card into the pocket of my jacket, not because I expected to use it, but because it felt rude not to take it. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I think tonight was enough excitement for one lifetime. Adrian allowed the faintest hint of a smile. Sometimes life does not ask what we prefer, he replied. Titan wagged his tail once, as if agreeing with the strange statement. Adrian glanced down at the massive dog again. He has good instincts, he said quietly. Animals often sense things before people do. Titan huffed softly, his large head tilting slightly. Adrian then looked back toward the road where his men were waiting. The engines of the vehicles had started again, their headlights cutting across the pavement. He seemed ready to leave, but before he turned away, he paused for a moment. Emily, there was something different in the way he said my name this time, less formal, more thoughtful. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you need help, you call the number on that card, he said. The statement sounded simple, but there was a weight behind it that made the night air feel heavier. I opened my mouth to respond, but he raised a hand slightly, not interrupting, just finishing his thought. You and your dog gave me something rare tonight, he said quietly, and I do not forget debts. Titan leaned gently against my leg again as Adrian finally turned and walked toward the waiting vehicles. The tall man opened the rear door of the first sport utility vehicle, and Adrian stepped inside. A moment later, the engines grew louder. The line of vehicles pulled back onto the highway, and within seconds the red taillights disappeared down the dark road, leaving me standing beside Titan in the quiet woods, holding a small card in my pocket and wondering how a normal drive home had suddenly become a night I would never forget. The road was empty again by the time Titan and I returned to the car, and for a long moment, I just stood beside the driver door staring down. The dark stretch of highway where the line of black vehicles had disappeared, the forest around Cedar Ridge, had gone quiet again, like the entire night had been nothing more than a strange dream. Titan climbed into the back seat with the heavy thump of a 140-pound dog settling into familiar territory, and I slid behind the steering wheel, my hands still slightly dirty from digging through the earth. The dashboard clock read 11:37 p.m., which meant Lily had probably been asleep for over an hour by now. She always tried to stay awake until I got home, but 6-year-olds rarely won that battle against bedtime. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness, while my mind replayed everything that had happened. The hand beneath the dirt, Titan digging like he knew someone was alive down there. The moment Adrian Romano opened his eyes and spoke, as if waking up from a short nap. Instead of being buried in the woods, I drove the remaining miles home almost on instinct, turning onto the gravel road that led to our small rented house. The porch light glowed warmly against the dark siding, and the sight of it instantly made the entire night feel unreal, like stepping from one world into another. Titan jumped down from the back seat the moment I opened the door and trotted toward the porch like he always did. When we got home late, I unlocked the door quietly. Stepping inside, the house smelled faintly like lavender from the detergent I used on Lily blankets, and the small night lamp in the hallway cast a soft yellow glow across the floor. Titan padded inside behind me, his large nails clicking gently against the wood. I walked to Lily's bedroom and pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. She was asleep, curled beneath her blanket with one arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she had carried everywhere since preschool. Her soft breathing filled the quiet room, and for the first time that night, my shoulders finally relaxed. Titan lowered himself beside the doorway like a silent guard while I stood there for a moment watching her sleep, making sure the world outside had not followed me home. After a minute, I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door softly. The house was still quiet, but the strange weight of the evening had not left my mind. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the small card Adrian had given me. The paper felt heavier than it should have for something so simple. Adrian Romano, a single phone number, nothing else, no title, no company, no explanation. I turned the card over once between my fingers, then set it on the small kitchen counter beside the sink. Titan lifted his head, watching me carefully, as if he sensed that the night was not truly over. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring at the card for a long moment. Part of me wanted to forget the entire evening drive to work tomorrow and pretend the woods had never revealed a man buried beneath the dirt, but another part of me could still hear Adrian's calm voice in the forest. The world is often changed by small moments. Titan gave a low, thoughtful huff from the floor beside the table, and as I turned off the kitchen light, I had the strange feeling that the quiet life I had known in Cedar Ridge had just shifted in a way I could not yet see. The house felt different the next morning, even though nothing had actually changed. The same pale sunlight came through the kitchen window, the same quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the room, and Titan lay stretched across the floor like a giant gray rug, but the memory of the night before lingered in the back of my mind like a question that had not yet been answered. I woke before Lily as usual and started the coffee maker, while Titan slowly lifted his head, watching me with calm, steady eyes, as if he knew we had shared something unusual the night before. "Good morning, big guy," I said softly, scratching behind his ear. Titan thumped his heavy tail once against the floor, then followed me into the kitchen, where the small card still rested on the counter exactly where I had left it. Adrian Romano. The simple black letters looked almost ordinary in the daylight, and for a moment I wondered if the entire encounter in the woods had been exaggerated by darkness and adrenaline, but Titan's sudden interest in the card told me otherwise. He leaned forward, sniffing it carefully before letting out a quiet breath. I poured coffee into a mug and leaned against the counter, looking at the card again. It was strange how something so small could feel so significant. Lily's voice floated down the hallway a few seconds later. "Mommy, are you home already?" I smiled, instantly walking toward her room. "Yes, sweetheart, I am home." She appeared in the doorway a moment later, her blonde hair messy from sleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit under one arm. Titan immediately padded over to greet her, lowering his giant head so she could wrap both arms around his neck like she always did. "Did Titan behave last night?" she asked seriously. I laughed softly, He behaved perfectly actually. Titan may have saved someone's life. Lily, eyes widen the way children eyes do when they hear something that sounds like the beginning of a story. Really? I nodded, kneeling down to help her straighten her pajama sleeve. Really? But it was a long night, so I will tell you about it another time. She accepted that answer easily, the way children often do when they know a story will eventually come later. After breakfast, I walked Lily to the small elementary school in Cedar Ridge. The cool morning air felt normal, peaceful, the kind of quiet town rhythm where everyone waved at each other and nobody expected anything extraordinary to happen. Titan walked beside me proudly on his leash, occasionally glancing up as if he was still on duty. After dropping Lily off, I returned home and started getting ready for my afternoon shift at the diner, trying to push the strange events of the night before to the back of my mind. But just as I stepped into the kitchen to grab my keys, Titan suddenly lifted his head again the same way he had in the car the night before, his ears rising, his body going still. I followed his gaze toward the window overlooking the gravel driveway, and that was when I noticed the black sedan parked quietly at the end of the road. It had not been there a minute earlier. The engine was running, and the windows were dark. Titan gave a low, thoughtful rumble deep in his chest, and although the car remained still, I could not shake the feeling that whoever sat inside it was waiting for something or someone. For a few seconds I stood completely still in the kitchen, staring through the window at the black sedan parked at the end of the gravel road. The engine continued to idle quietly, and the sunlight reflected off the dark windshield, making it impossible to see who was inside. Titan slowly stood up from the floor, his massive shoulders rising as he moved closer to the window beside me. The low rumble in his chest had returned, not loud, not aggressive, just a deep warning sound that meant he had noticed something unusual. I folded my arms and leaned slightly closer to the glass, trying to decide whether I was imagining things. Cedar Ridge was the kind of town where strangers were noticed immediately. People did not usually sit in parked cars outside someone's house unless they had a reason. Titan watched the sedan without blinking, his heavy tail perfectly still, which was never a good sign. After about 30 seconds, the driver's side door opened slowly and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dark coat and sunglasses. Even though the morning sun was still soft, he looked around briefly, then started walking up the gravel driveway toward the house, his steps calm and unhurried. Titan gave a single sharp bark, and I placed my hand gently on his neck. Easy, I whispered, although my own heartbeat had started to pick up. The man stopped several feet from the porch and lifted one hand in a polite greeting. Good morning, Miss Carter, he said, his voice professional and calm. The moment he spoke, my stomach tightened slightly because he clearly knew who I was. Yes, I replied carefully. Can I help you? The man removed his sunglasses, revealing steady dark eyes. My name is Daniel, he said. I work with Mr. Adrian Romano. Titan remained planted beside me, watching him closely. Daniel continued speaking without stepping any closer. Mr. Romano asked me to stop by this morning to make sure you and your daughter are safe. I blinked, surprised. Safe, I repeated. Yes, ma'am, Daniel said respectfully. After the events last night, Mr. Romano believes it would be wise to confirm that everything here is normal. Titan tilted his head slightly, as if he was analyzing the man's voice for hidden meaning. I crossed my arms slowly. Nothing unusual has happened here. Daniel nodded once. That is good to hear. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Mr. Romano asked me to deliver this to you personally. He held the envelope out, but did not step closer, so I walked to the edge of the porch and took it. The paper felt thick and sealed with a small fold. Thank you, I said, unsure what else to say. Daniel gave a brief, respectful nod. Mr. Romano also asked me to pass along a message, he said. I waited while Titan watched him without blinking. Daniel continued speaking, his tone calm and precise. He said to tell you that sometimes when a person survives something unexpected, the world around them begins to shift. He said the night in the forest may not be finished yet. Titan gave another quiet rumble beside me, but Daniel simply replaced his sunglasses and stepped back toward the driveway. If you need anything, Miss Carter, you have his number, he said with a polite nod. Then he returned to the black sedan. The engine grew louder as the car turned around at the end of the gravel road and disappeared down the same quiet stretch of pavement, leaving me standing on the porch with Titan beside me and a sealed envelope from a man who had been buried in the woods less than 12 hours earlier. I stood on the porch for several seconds after the black sedan disappeared down the road, the morning air suddenly feeling quieter than before. Titan remained beside me, his large head turning slowly toward the empty driveway as if making sure the visitor was truly gone. Only when The sound of the engine faded completely. Did he relax slightly, letting out a deep breath through his nose? I looked down at the envelope still in my hand. The paper was heavier than a normal letter and carefully sealed with a simple fold. No logo, no markings, just my name written neatly across the front. Emily Carter. Titan nudged my elbow, gently reminding me that we were still standing outside, so I stepped back into the house, closing the door. Behind us, the familiar quiet of the kitchen wrapped around me again, the smell of coffee still lingering in the air. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table and stared at it for a moment, trying to decide whether opening it would pull me further into whatever world Adrian Romano lived in, or if ignoring it would somehow keep my life normal. Titan climbed onto the floor beside the table, watching me with patient curiosity, like he understood the decision mattered. Finally, I slid my finger under the fold and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper and something else, a small metal key attached to a plain silver ring. I unfolded the paper slowly and read the message written in clean, precise handwriting. Miss Carter, if you are reading this, it means Daniel has confirmed that you and your daughter are safe. I am grateful for what you and Titan did last night. There are moments in life when a person receives help from an unexpected place, and it changes the direction of everything. I believe last night was one of those moments for both of us. The key enclosed with this letter belongs to a safety deposit box at Cedar Ridge Community Bank. Inside you will find something that may help you understand why I said the night in the forest may not be finished yet. You are not required to open it, but if you choose to do so, I suggest you do not wait too long. Adrian Romano. I read the note twice before lowering the paper. Slowly, Titan lifted his head, watching me carefully, like he could sense the weight of the decision forming in my mind. A safety deposit box at the local bank made no sense. Why would a man like Adrian Romano leave something like that in Cedar Ridge of all places? I turned the small key in my fingers, the metal catching the morning sunlight from the window. The house was quiet again, just the ticking of the kitchen clock and Titan's slow breathing filling the room. Part of me wanted to put the letter back in the envelope and pretend none of it existed, but another part of me could still hear Adrian's calm voice from the night before. The world is often changed by small moments. Titan thumped his tail once against the floor, as if reminding me that sometimes those moments start with something as simple as a dog digging in the dirt. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, turning the small silver key slowly between my fingers while Titan watched from the floor beside the table, his large eyes following every movement I made. The letter from Adrian Romano still rested open beside the envelope, the handwriting calm and precise like the man himself. The words echoed in my mind, you are not required to open it, but do not wait too long. I exhaled slowly and folded the paper again, sliding it back into the envelope before placing both the letter and the key into my jacket pocket. Titan lifted his head as if he already knew what I was about to do. Come on, I said quietly, and the massive dog rose immediately, his tail giving a slow, confident wag. Cedar Ridge Community Bank was only 5 minutes from the house. The drive there felt strangely normal, the small town streets already busy with the quiet rhythm of morning people walking into the bakery, a delivery truck stopping outside the grocery store, a couple of farmers talking beside a pickup truck. Nothing about the peaceful town suggested that somewhere nearby a man had been buried in the woods. Less than a day earlier, I parked along the curb outside the bank. Titan remained in the car, watching me through the window. As I stepped inside the building, the bank smelled faintly like polished wood and fresh paper, the kind of place where everyone greeted each other by name. The teller behind the counter smiled politely. Good morning, how can I help you today? I reached into my pocket and placed the small silver key on the counter. I believe there is a safety deposit box here connected to this key. The teller examined it briefly, then nodded. Yes, that belongs to one of our private boxes. May I see identification? I handed her my driver's license, and after a quick check she returned it with a professional smile. Please follow me, Miss Carter. She led me through a secure door and down a quiet hallway until we reached the vault area. Rows of small metal boxes lined the wall. She stopped beside one of them and inserted a bank key alongside the one I had brought with me. The lock clicked softly. You may take your time, she said before stepping away to give me privacy. My heart beat a little faster as I opened the box. Inside was a small stack of documents and a velvet pouch. I carefully lifted the pouch. First, it was heavier than I expected. When I opened it, I found a simple gold bracelet inside, delicate but clearly expensive. Beneath the pouch rested a folder containing several papers. I opened the folder slowly. The first page held a typed note in the same calm tone I recognized from Adrian's letter. If you are seeing this, it means you chose curiosity over comfort. The bracelet belonged to someone important to me many years ago, and it represents a promise that I once failed to keep. If you are holding it now, it means I am asking for a second chance to keep that promise, this time not for the past, but for the future. I stared at the words for a long moment, trying to understand why a man like Adrian Romano would trust something like this to someone he had only met the night before. Titan waited patiently in the car outside the bank, unaware that the quiet morning in Cedar Ridge had just become even more mysterious than the night in the forest. For a long moment I stood alone in the quiet vault of Cedar Ridge Community Bank, holding the velvet pouch and the folded note in my hands, the fluorescent lights humming softly above me, while the strange weight of the moment settled in my chest. The bracelet rested against my palms, simple, elegant, and warm from my touch. It did not look like something connected to danger or secrets, yet Adrian's words echoed clearly in my mind. It represents a promise that I once failed to keep. Titan was waiting outside in the car, and the thought of him sitting patiently in the driver's seat window watching the world pass by somehow grounded me. I carefully placed the bracelet back into the pouch, then returned the documents into the folder and closed the safety deposit box. After locking it, the teller escorted me back through the quiet hallway and wished me a pleasant day. As if nothing unusual had happened, I stepped outside into the bright Cedar Ridge morning, the sunlight warmer now than when I had arrived. Titan immediately stood up in the back seat when he saw me approaching, his heavy tail thumping against the door. I opened the car and climbed inside. While I said softly to him, "You were right to trust your instincts." Titan tilted his head and gave a quiet, satisfied huff, like he understood every word. I started the engine, but instead of pulling away immediately, I sat there for a moment looking at the velvet pouch resting in my lap. The small gold bracelet inside felt less like a gift and more like a question, one that connected the quiet life I had built in Cedar Ridge with the dangerous, mysterious world that Adrian Romano clearly belonged to. Finally, I placed the pouch carefully into the glove compartment and drove back toward the house, the familiar road winding through tall trees and open fields. Titan watched the passing scenery calmly, his presence steady and reassuring. When we arrived home, the porch looked exactly the same as it had that morning, peaceful, ordinary, untouched by the strange chain of events that had started in the forest the night before I stepped inside the house and set my keys on the kitchen counter. The envelope from Adrian still lay there, beside the coffee mug I had left earlier. For the first time since the night before, I felt something shift inside me, not fear, not uncertainty, something closer to understanding. Adrian had said the world is often changed by small moments, and now I knew exactly what he meant. Sometimes the moment is a dog digging in the dirt, sometimes it is a stranger choosing to stop on a dark road, and sometimes it is the quiet decision to open a small safety deposit box in a sleepy town. Titan settled down beside the kitchen table, resting his head on his paws while sunlight streamed through the window. I looked down at him and smiled slightly. Whatever path had started in those woods, I had a feeling it was only beginning. And somewhere out there, Adrian Romano was probably thinking the same thing about the night a single mother and her loyal dog decided to stop and dig.